it comes to getting a great finish, you can't overlook the importance of taping and finishing drywall joints. Today, we're going to show you some tricks that'll help you get the job done right the first time. Let's start with the drywall preparation. Take a utility knife and cut the paper along each side of the butt joint and fill it with some joint compound. This will ensure any loose paper is removed and the gap is filled, creating a stronger joint. At this time, you should also cut out any damaged drywall edges and fill with compound. The fasteners should be checked. To determine if fasteners are properly seated prior to finishing, draw a clean knife over each fastener. If you hear a metallic ring, you'll have to drive the fastener in further. When the joint compound is dry, tape the butt joints. Apply an even coat of thin joint compound for the length of the joint with a 5 or 6 inch finishing knife. Then, center and lightly press tape into wet joint compound with your fingers. Draw your knife firmly along the joint to tightly embed the tape. Be sure there's enough joint compound under the tape to prevent blistering. While embedding the tape, remove excess joint compound from the edge and apply a thin coat over the tape. The next step is to reinforce tapered joints, following the same procedure. Tape should overlap the tape applied to the butt joints. Here are a few tips. For best results, apply medium pressure and hold the knife at a 45-degree angle to the panel. To keep things neat, you should dip the knife sideways into the pan, so you load only half the width of the blade. Slightly thinning the compound with water will make the application easier. For 1 gallon of compound, add water in 2-ounce increments. Remix and test apply after each water addition until the desired consistency is reached. It's also important to keep the blade clean, especially free of any dried bits of compound, to avoid leaving scratches in the wet compound as you draw your knife over it. Clean the blade by drawing it over the edge of the pan. While embedding tape, draw the knife slowly along the length of the tape to provide an even distribution of joint compound. Don't worry about a few grooves or streaks in the joint compound, as they'll be covered in subsequent coats. Now, let's move on to the inside corners. Using your knife, apply a thin layer of joint compound on both sides of the corner. Extend the compound slightly beyond the area that'll be covered by tape. Fold the tape along the center crease and lightly press it into position with your fingers. Tightly embed the tape, as with other joints. Now, let's install the paper-faced metal bead. For this, you want to apply joint compound with a 5 or 6 inch knife onto both edges of the drywall. Place the corner bead over the compound and press in place with your fingers. With the knife, wipe the paper into the compound, drawing the knife slowly along the length of the tape to provide an even distribution of joint compound. Then, remove excess compound. Apply a thin coat over the tape. When it comes to applying joint compound to fasteners, you'll need to hold the blade almost flush with the panel, drawing the compound across the fastener head and the dimple surrounding it. Then, raise the knife blade to a more upright position and scrape off any excess compound with a second stroke at a right angle to the first stroke. The material should be level with the panel surface. Now that you're done with the first coat, let it dry overnight and come back the next day for the second coat, starting with flat joints and fasteners. Start by scraping off bumps, ridges, and other imperfections with your knife or by light sanding. You should be careful not to damage the surface. Next, you'll apply the fill coat, which uses a technique called feathering. Start by applying a layer of joint compound to tapered joints using an 8 or 10 inch knife along the length of the joint. Apply pressure to the knife edge farthest from the joint center and lift the other edge just slightly above the surface and draw your knife down the length of the joint. Repeat this for the opposite edge, and then pass your knife over the center of the joint, covering the full width of the joint. Additional passes are made to reduce bubbles and smooth the surface. Check to see if sufficient compound is over the joint, but not any more than is needed. For the butt joints, apply compound 8 to 10 inches wide to both sides of the tape. Be careful not to place excess compound directly over the tape. The tape is the high point, and the compound is applied to either side using the apply, feather, and wipe technique. Once the fasteners are done, apply a second coat to the inside corners. As before, apply joint compound on one side using a 5 or 6 inch knife for the length of the corner. Feather the edge and scrape off any compound that laps onto the second side. After the first side is dry, apply compound on the other side and feather. From here, you can move on to the fill coat for the paper-faced metal corner bead. Apply this coat with an 8 to 10 inch knife, feathering and wiping as with the flat joints. Now, apply a second coat to the fasteners in the same way as you did the first coat. Let the fill coat dry overnight. The finish coat starts with scraping off bumps, ridges, and other imperfections with your knife or by light sanding. You should be careful not to damage the surface. The finish coat starts again with flat joints first, then butt joints, followed by the corner beads and fasteners. Apply a thin finishing coat with a 10 or 12 inch knife to the flat joints and the corner beads, and use a 5 or 6 inch knife to the fastener heads and inside corners. Press the knife firmly so the joint compound fills depressions, but does not significantly add to the wall's thickness. Feather the edges at least 2 inches beyond fill coat. Here's a quick tip. Before applying the final coat, check to see if joints are level with the surface. Using a blade, hold it across the joint, straight out from the wall. If it's hollow, additional coats may be necessary. If the blade can be rocked across the joint is crowned. It must be hidden by feathering the final coat out as far as possible. For the earlier coats, minor depressions and grooves aren't a problem. However, you can't leave any during the application of this final coat, or they'll mar the finished surface. Next, apply the final coat for the outside corners. Apply your finish coat with a 10 or 12 inch knife, feathering slightly beyond the fill coat. Generally speaking, drywall joints, fasteners, beads, and trims should be finished as smoothly as possible to minimize the need to sand. But even the best professionals usually have to do some light sanding. For tips on the best methods to sand joint compound, see our video on sanding joint compound. By following these simple tips and tricks for taping and finishing drywall joints, you're sure to get a smooth interior surface.